The Russian Revolution was a time in global history when the working people felt that they were entitled to political power that they never had before. The ideas that started the Russian Revolution, that wealth should be distributed and shared equally among citizens of a nation, can be seen in modern political movements.
The Russian Revolution was, I think, one of the most important events of the 20th century, one of the defining events of the 20th century. Of course, I do believe that the Bolsheviks made a difference because they attached to the revolution a kind of a global dimension, a call for a universal uprising and abolition of injustice worldwide.
About 100 years before the Russian Revolution, most people in the world were farmers. And in Russia, perhaps 90% of the people lived in the countryside. Most of these people did not own land. They had to work for the people who owned the land. They were called serfs. It was just very much like a slavery.
In 1900, just 39 years since the abolishment of serfdom, 4/5 of the Russians were peasants, and only 1/5 could read or write. At the turn of the 19th century, Russia was a large country stretching 5,000 miles from the German border to the Pacific Ocean. The Russian Empire covered 1/6 of the Earth's land and spread across 2 continents, Europe and Asia. In 1900, Russia had a population of 130 million. Less than half were Russian. Others were Finns, Poles, Armenians, Ukrainians, and dozens of other groups speaking many different languages and practicing many different religions, all together under the Tsar's rule. For almost 300 years, Russia was ruled by the Romanov family monarchy. Tsar Nicholas II came to power in 1894 when he was only 26 years old. During Nicholas's reign, modern forms of communication were bringing ideas of democracy and freedom to the Russian people. Rebel groups were forming to oppose the Tsar's rule. The largest of the revolutionary groups was the Bolsheviks, which means majority in Russian. The Bolsheviks were influenced by Karl Marx, a German political philosopher who believed that workers should have more power because they are the ones that drive the economy. He also believed that private property should be abolished so society becomes more equal. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, was made up mostly of workers who considered themselves the leaders of the revolutionary working class of Russia. Workers had virtually no rights under the Tsar's rule. They were given little food, pay, or rest. The Bolsheviks' goal was to improve such working conditions. In 1905, a group of workers peacefully marched to the Tsar's palace, demanding better living conditions. The Tsar's guards reacted with violence, killing 130 protesters. Riots and protests around the country followed what was called the Bloody Sunday.
The Bolsheviks believed that people have the ability to bring something about if they only want it. They believed in what philosophers call voluntarism. You have the ability to really desire something badly through the strength of your mind, and then you can bring it about.
The writings of journalist Maxim Gorky show that the ideas created in the small, industrialized country of Germany had spread to Russia, a large agrarian nation.
In Russia, a revolution is bursting into flame. The Russian Revolution is a cultural and constructive movement, the only movement capable of saving Russia from political dissolution. Long live, then, the proletariat as it goes forth to renew the whole world. Long live socialism, the religion of the future.
In 1914, World War I broke out, and Russia joined England and France to fight against Germany.
Russia is a very big country. It had a lot of problems mobilizing for war, so initially Russian soldiers did not have adequate weapons, adequate supplies, adequate food.
By 1917, the Russian people were running low on food, fuel, and shelter, and thousands of Russian soldiers were abandoning the army.
My grandfather, he did a very brave thing. Just ran away from the Russian army. If soldiers deserted the army, they could be shot immediately.
In March of 1917, Riots broke out in major Russian cities. Factory workers, frustrated with inhumane working conditions, joined them and started attacking buildings and police stations. The Tsar ordered his army to control the rioters, but instead, the Tsar's soldiers joined the rebels. At this moment, Nicholas realized he no longer had any power and he had to give up his throne. A temporary provisional government was set up until there could be free elections. The Russian people wanted to get out of World War I, but the provisional government felt pressure from its allies, England and France, to keep fighting. Only one group posed a serious threat to the provisional government, and that was the Bolsheviks led by Lenin. Lenin promised that he would withdraw Russia from World War I and he would arm the workers. In October of 1917, the Bolsheviks quickly seized power and refused to cooperate with other socialist groups. Lenin went back on his promise of freedom of speech by shutting down newspapers that expressed opposing political views.
Lenin was not just a ruthless politician, but Lenin also distinguished between means and ends, and in the end he believed in the ends. How do you engage with a country that has this huge disparity, not only in income, but also in education and access to education? Do you give them basically all the say and say, well, let's put it to a democratic test? Or do you think, well, I actually know better than they, and I'm acting in their best interest?
There are no morals in politics. There's only expedience.
The Bolsheviks tried to put into effect a government that, over a short period of time, would actually, in the name of the people, own the land and own the factories and own the apartment buildings, everything.
Men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past.
A civil war began between the Bolsheviks, known as the Reds, and the Whites, the anti-Bolshevik groups that had allied to remove Lenin from power.
There was a butchery on both sides, but at the end of the day, the Bolsheviks were able to create slogans, symbols that embodied this bright future, whereas the whites that they fought, they were actually seen as the has-been powers, as the supporters of the Tsar.
France and England and the United States actually sent troops into Russia to try to control events and perhaps bring the Tsar's government back.
The Civil War lasted until 1921, and the Bolsheviks won.
There is a tendency to see the revolution as this political coup, which it was, but it was something much bigger. There was a sense that this world is ending, and it's ending for a reason, because it built on oppression. Even had Lenin not existed, of course the revolution would have happened.
A revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. Furthermore, not every revolutionary situation leads to revolution.
I mean, just an interesting parallel. The level of wealth inequality in Russia before the revolution was high, but it was not as radical as it is in the United States today. Would you say in the US there's a revolutionary situation? We don't know, probably not. I mean, there's Occupy Wall Street.
The communist government that formed in Russia focused on bringing economic and social rights to the diverse people of the nation, but denied citizens freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Lenin ordered the execution of many priests, and the new government's agricultural policies contributed to a mass famine that killed millions when the communists took away farmers' seed grain. After Stalin, communism spread and Western countries feared a growing ideology that denied basic civil and political rights. However, the ideas that started the Russian Revolution, that workers should gain political power and wealth should be shared equally, can be seen in modern political movements.
Like in Libya and Tunisia and Syria, people are expressing themselves in opposition to their governments in lots of countries where we never saw it happen. Partly it has to do with the industrial and the technological revolutions that make people think that there are rights that their government should not prevent them from exercising.
Like the political movements today, the Russian Revolution was inspired by ideas. The Russian Revolution is important to remember because it was a time in history when a large and complex nation broke free from totalitarian rule and pursued an ideal of social equality.